Well, we're going to get started now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Woodpecker webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Luke Silvakowski, and I'm a member of the business growth team here at Woodpecker. And I'll be the host for this webinar today. And please meet Margaret Chikota, who is the head of customer support here at Woodpecker and is also a lawyer who specializes in international and European law.
Thank you for this intro. That's great to be here today.
Well, lately we've been getting lots of questions about general data protection regulation, and it's a European Union law that is being brought into force this May. And that's why we decided to make it the topic of our webinar. I've invited Margaret because she knows the answers to the questions about GDPR and about the regulation. So today we're going to talk about what GDPR is about, who it applies to, and what small or medium companies should do to be GDPR compliant. One important thing to note here is that before we move on, please do not treat this webinar as legal advice, because we're just going to be giving you examples of how GDPR works and practical examples as well, so we have a better understanding of it. But remember, every company works in a unique business context. So if you're looking for legal advice, you should contact a lawyer who will be able to take out specific and ask you specific questions about your case. So let's get started with our questions. So what is GDPR?
Basically, GDPR is one of the biggest changes since last 20 years in Europe as far as data protection are concerned. And what's important to know is that GDPR is directly applicable in national laws or national jurisdictions. So even if you doubt if it's EU law, so how I should approach, it's binding in your country if your country is located in EU. So yeah, that's definitely a huge change.
And could you tell me a little bit of why we have GDPR now?
Definitely, with pleasure. Because last regulation and last updates were made 20 years ago, and I believe that all of us are able to imagine how fast the world is changing, and technology, growth, and all the world just went crazy about data. Basically, data is like new currency of the world. So on the slide right now, you can see the level of control over data. So if the people feel that they can actually control their personal data. And for me, it's just striking because, for example, in case of Germany, there's only 4% of people believe that they can actually affect how their data are used. With still a very big margin, this with the red color, stating that there is no control at all. So basically, GDPR came from a very strong social background with the support that this is something we as people actually need.
Okay, well, GDPR sounds like big news. Is this the first time the EU Parliament is regulating processing of personal data?
Definitely not. The last regulation is quite outdated right now. So this is actually the question on our slide. Is it a new approach or just an upgrade? I would say it's actually both, because we have something old left in there, but something also upgraded to new standards.
Okay, so what has changed now in comparison to what we had before in the EU?
We'll discuss some principles later on, so we'll be able to in a more detailed way into lawfulness and storage limitation and so on, just as a brief notion. But yeah, in general, we have new set of rules, and the way of executing things is slightly reversed. So you moved from the perspective that we should actually report things or be required to register into the obligation on entities to provide due care for personal data, to provide special standards of protection in companies. So slightly different mechanism, definitely different thinking. Yeah, so that's just a new big thing.
Okay, so why should we care about this? Are there going to be any repercussions from this?
Yeah, I know that the penalties are definitely something what is a big thing because it's striking and all people are terrified. We need to remember about certain important things. GDPR was not made to punish anyone or to make the business more difficult for enterprises. It was actually made for individuals, and it erases from the article, which is concentrated on actually individual rights. So the thing is that, of course, there are repercussions, and if someone absolutely ignores GDPR, there is something to be afraid of. Nevertheless, if you do anything or something that is accessible to your business, it's not like any action which is incompletely perfect or will be penalized. So I would say that more of a common sense and just straight thinking, instead of being just afraid of the repercussions.
Common sense and straight thinking sounds good. Could you tell me any new rules that come from GDPR?
Sure. So basically, the newest approaches and time limitation, which will be discussed slightly later, more detailed way, but like the general big rule is that we need to think from the perspective of an individuals. It goes for different smaller perspectives, so storage limitation, lawfulness, fairness, or adequacy. Nevertheless, the whole goal of the coverage for that is that we need to know what we are doing because we are actually taking care of something what is very important for an individual. So data which may endanger the rights and the privileges of persons or of a human being. So I mean, new sets, but this new set was mentioned before in the previous law made by EU. The only thinking and the approach is slightly different.
Okay, so now we're going to move to the new slide. And can you answer another question for me?
Definitely.
Who does GDPR apply to? Who should be concerned about GDPR?
Well, basically, it applies fully in the EU. If you run any business, it's probably applicable to you because I can hardly imagine any business entity dealing with business without data. That's kind of self-explanatory. It also applies to all data stored outside of the EU, but if they belong to EU citizens. So we have a bit of transnationality in here. So going abroad beyond the EU, and definitely all types of data which can be said to be personal.
Okay, so GDPR deals with personal data. According to GDPR, what data is considered personal?
That's a tricky question because I feel that we are slightly used to very standard definitions. So name and surname, obviously, but what was like less typical data? Personal data is anything what can be traced back to a person. So, for example, the big question, can email address be treated as a personal data? It depends, because if we use email address like info@Woodpecker.co, it just indicates legal entity, so a company, and it barely can be said to be a personal data. Nevertheless, if, for example, my email address is Margaret@Woodpecker.co, and I'm the only Margaret in this company, and on our webpage we have an about section which is fully accessible for anyone who just wish to visit our webpage. So it's kind of easy to trace me back that it's me, that I'm working here. So then the data is personal. It's also a very typical question about, for example, ID numbers. Because it seems to be very personal, because of course, if you have an ID, there is a number and it belongs to you and it's unique. Nevertheless, let's assume that we keep ID numbers of our employees on the pen drive. And we lose the pen drive, and we need to somehow assess the risk. So what happened, how gross the violation is right now. Basically, the answer is that I would assess is very low, because what the person who finds the pen drive gets is just potentially an Excel spreadsheet with some numbers, which denotes basically nothing, unless you can access any like governmental web page which traces back the people. So I mean, you need to really be in the context and check, and this is something what makes general GDPR possible to accompany your own needs. So yeah, definitely the context is determining here.
So since you're talking about people's emails, can you tell me a specific, is there any specific case where a person's email is considered to be personal data?
Definitely, it's once it contains name and surname. It's very typical that if you are professionally using your email address, but you don't have, for example, your own domain, you'll probably include name and surname before that. So then, of course, because it's just a typical way of displaying the most obvious personal data. In case of all company related, like info at something, Woodpecker, for example, or hello at something, those are not personal data.
Okay, so since GDPR is about this personal data, when can I say that I'm processing personal data?
Processing is another very broad term because basically European Commission decided to cover by processing almost everything. So since storage to any other further action made made on data, this is processing. So basically, if you're just having data, you're actually processing them.
Okay. So what if I have different kinds of data in my company? What can we do about it then?
This is a bit risk assessment related question, because probably some of you would be interested in making some small risk assessment inside of company, even if you're not obliged to, but that's still a good step to take. Then the actually only reasonable way is to sit and think what data you use in your company. The basic question is that if those are data of your employees, of your customers, whoever else you use in the company, so then treat them just separately, assess the risk, because that's quite obvious that probably you will need more extensive types of data of your employees than in some cases of your customers. That's very particular in case of any example. So the best way is to categorize them, to name them, and then to be able to store them, for example, separately, or use different protection techniques towards different categories of data.
Okay, so are there any differences in the EU member states when it comes to GDPR interpretation?
Well, GDPR as a regulation enters into force in the way it is legislated by the EU. So if it happens that there are any differences due to, for example, translation made in any country, it actually is not changing anything because it comes into the force as it was legislated. Nevertheless, all the procedure around GDPR may differ. If you try to read GDPR at any point, you will get the notion that it was very general. Actually, it is very general. And the notions are more like ideas and motives than like precise ways of doing something. And this is also why EU law may be applied in different countries, because the whole procedure around it may be built by the country to accustom the regulation to enter into force.
Okay, so now let's discuss more practical matters. Say I run a small or medium-sized business. Are there any things that I need to change in practice to make sure I'm more GDPR compliant? Would you recommend any type of restructuring?
Definitely there is something. Until now, there was a strong trend to have slightly fictional data protection policy. So right now it should be way much more practical. Of course, we should remember that European Commission did not make GDPR to just kill all small and medium enterprises, because probably they can't afford any legal help or any professional data administrator to enter the company. And to be honest, I don't think that even taking someone from the outside of the company is the best idea. Actually, what you should do and what is the best and the safest way in dealing with the problem is that you may categorize your data. Then you may think if you have any product like software or you provide any service, if there is any danger on the other side, to reveal data which should not be revealed, and just try to take any steps towards reduction of this danger. And this is basically something what you can do on your own, because you are probably the person who knows your own business the best.
Okay, so would you say it is really necessary to hire a data protection specialist?
Well, data protection specialist, to mention at the beginning, is slightly different than this obligatory function coming from GDPR, because it bears no responsibility from a legal perspective. And of course, you are not obliged to do so. Nevertheless, in Woodpecker, we decided to have a data protection specialist, because sometimes in a rush of everyday routine, it's very difficult to have this one person who will stop for a while and focus on the way your data are processed within the company. So it's more for your comfort. Nevertheless, the thing of hiring, it depends on your business, but if it's more complex or with some legacy from, I don't know, previous companies or people with whom you work, that would be even safer to appoint a person inside of your company, because sometimes there's something going on behind in the very roots of the company which should be known, and it's very difficult to introduce a person who is just absolutely new and from the outside of the company to understand those processes which are going on inside, and to know actually what is also doable for you, because you need to remember that there are always both sides. And the perfect scenario is not always accessible for us. So we need to be prepared to do what is the best version of what we can give to protect data.
So could you tell me if a business, whether small or large, needs to make any changes to the product or services because of this?
Well, definitely there is something. The biggest thing is the security of data. So if you had the habit of, I don't know, keeping data of your employees on an open source Google Drive, probably this is not the best idea. And all of this type of small measures should be, and actually can be easily implemented inside of the company, because it's not so hard to do, but the change in the product is more the matter which you should discuss with your data protection specialist if you decide to appoint, because always there's something what can be improved. So it's just the question if it's doable, so if you can afford, if you can from a technical perspective do it, and how strongly it will raise the protection within your company or within your product.
So now a risk assessment sounds like something that could be really troublesome. Is it really necessary to do?
Well, you're not obliged to do so unless you process special sensitive data. Nevertheless, in my opinion, this is something what is really worth doing, because sometimes we may think very generally about our data and we may think that we know what's going on, but then when we reach this point when we need to put it on paper, it gets slightly more difficult. So I would say risk assessment is a good thing because of two reasons. It really makes you to evaluate if the process in your company is efficient, and don't think about risk assessment as a super statistic thing which you will never be able to do on your own, because it's something what is actually pretty doable. Just think about the scale. You already probably categorize your data, so you know here are employees, customers, somewhere else. You know how to keep those data. If you transfer them outside of the EU or they are just kept here, because remember that's an extra value if you don't transfer data outside of EU. And yeah, then just try to assess the risk. So what is the potential effect on a person? So from the individual perspective, you may think in a way as if you would think about yourself. So if, for example, I have a database of containing email addresses, what would be the potential result for me if my email address got revealed? That's quite easy to assess, that no one may steal my identity, that no one can take a loan on behalf of me. So the risk may be assessed as pretty low. And of course, it won't be perfect. It may not be perfect between GDPR enters into force fully. Nevertheless, in case of any control or any situation which may be said to be difficult, so a huge breach in your company which occurred and you don't know how, you may show that you tried. So there was due care, and basically, I don't believe that it will make you to pay the huge fine, because from the perspective of a small or a medium enterprise, you did as much as you could with your business situation at the moment.
So since GDPR is coming into force soon, what happens if I cannot afford to make these changes as a result of this regulation?
Well, don't treat it as a very comfortable excuse to do anything, because then definitely there is something you can do. I mean, just making a risk assessment is basically dividing 2 or 3 days of your time and then thinking about your company and writing it down. This is definitely something what each of us can afford and what we should do. Data protection specialists within the company, that may be the matter of negotiating with one of your employees. Of course, may be doable or not, but still, there are some steps which you can take. So, for example, instead of using open source solution, try to think if it's possible to buy some extra protection from the service which you use externally. Also, try to think if you can get any specific documents, or if the services which you use in its terms of service possess any information about GDPR compliance, because then you can just say, I've chosen this solution because they said that they are GDPR compliant, and you basically don't have any resource to check or validate everything what other person says, so we need to believe to some extent. So definitely not all changes will be affordable and accessible, but just remember that trying and doing something is better than doing nothing, because there is no fully made recipe what to do to be GDPR compliant. Of course, you will read in the internet and you will find some guides what to do to be perfectly fine, though the truth is that there is no state practice and there is no law which regulates. So actually you cannot know what is 100% GDPR compliant, so you should just try and check it out.
Okay, since you mentioned GDPR principles, could you tell me some more about those?
Definitely. We have basically lawfulness, adequacy, accuracy, storage limitation there. So those are the major ones. Each of them is to highlight the like ideas behind GDPR. So I believe we'll talk about them briefly soon.
Okay, so legality, fairness, and transparency. They sound very jargony. Could you tell me about what they mean?
Definitely, just as a brief introduction, if you, for whatever reason, be interested in finding principles, GDPR principles in the text of GDPR, most of them are located in Article 5, so feel free to go there, check it out. Yeah, so that would be our way of interpreting it for you. Transparency is very intuitive, so I'll start with this one because it's just to show to the subject of data what is the purpose and how they are processed, so not to hide. If you have any sub-processors, that would be better to tell about it than hide it somewhere and just believe that no one will find out. Then fairness, this is probably the most intuitive out of any GDPR principles because it just means that rules need to be fair. And I often hear that, but it's too general to apply it anywhere, so how should I do it? Well, I mean, what does it mean to be fair? If you collect the data and you say, I'll take your email address because I wish to send you a newsletter, and the person says, okay, that's lovely, and then you use the email address to sell it to another company, I mean, does it sound fair for you? So there is really strong common sense background, and you can figure out, I believe, all of those mostly on your own. Just think from your perspective, like what you get by saying that it's fair. And the lawfulness is that simply the standards which are in GDPR need to be met. So probably if you just find the database of any data like addresses, email addresses, names and surnames in the internet, and you even don't know the source, or if the people were informed that your data are there, taking this database is probably not the best and most GDPR compliant idea.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about what this means in practice?
In practice, it just means that once you obtain data, you need to know the source. So if there is any legal ground, if you process, you need to think that there is this information obligation on you. So the person who owns the data, so the data belongs to the person, should know in what way and why the data are processed.
Okay, so now I have a question about adequacy. How do I know if the data I collect is adequate or not?
Okay, so with the adequacy, the thing is that to some extent describes adequacy and relevance are from two perspectives, because limitedness is something very easy to be traced back, because limitedness just denotes how and what are the boundaries for processing. So if I get a consent to process data and this way, I should not overcross the limitation which I was given, and that basically it goes together with storage limitations. So any data processing should have its own limits, which should not be overcrossed. And adequacy and relevance is about what data you collect. So basically, if you need to send a newsletter or any correspondence, probably you don't need very detailed data. Like for newsletter, what you can get, name and email address should be enough. You may need a surname for whatever reason if it's necessary for you. Nevertheless, a phone number or a full address or a job title or a company the person works, that actually may be, but anything what overcrosses what is necessary to process the function to which the person agreed, it should not be more. So think what is relevant for you and what is adequate for the purpose for which you obtained the data. And with the relevance is that there is a trend that we just collect data just in case of new marketing strategy, just in case maybe we need it next year. If the data are not relevant for you right now, probably they will not be relevant in 1 year, because if they are just lying for last 10 months somewhere on your computer, just delete them, because this is definitely something that goes in line with this set of rules. Okay,
so now let's say I collect a lot of data. Does limitedness mean that I should stop collecting this much data? How can I interpret this principle?
Well, it's a clash of a volume versus what you need. So basically, it's something what you should answer yourself. If you're mass processor, so for example, you have a huge marketing strategy and you want to reach out to new customers, but they consented, it's not something what over process limitedness. Nevertheless, if you just collect data because you can, I mean, that's just sound odd if you say it out loud. I don't think that any of us feels comfortable with stating that I just collect data because I can. So yeah, definitely there is something what may be cut out and left behind you.
Okay. Now I've heard a term connected to GDPR, pseudonymization. Could
Yeah.
you tell us what that is about?
Yeah, it's the idea which was already there because you can just simply exchange data. For example, if you use any IT system or something like this, probably you don't need to process the data in the form as they are, so you can exchange them for something different like ID number or anything else. So it's just basically saving the safety of data, so being more GDPR compliant and more in line with this, because instead of processing the data per se as they are, we are exchanging them for numbers or any short forms or something like this. So it's something what happens more in the back of the processing.
Okay, so now can you tell me a little bit about the accuracy principle? What's it about and how I can tell if the personal data I collect is accurate?
Definitely, I can imagine that it sounds confusing. Accuracy is the fact that data sometimes needs to be updated. So, for example, if one of my subscribers changed name or surname for whatever reason, and the person requests the update, I should provide such a possibility. Or if there is any spelling error, mistake, or anything what should be kept accurate, so denoting the person in a correct way, there should be a special form the person can access, for example, or just let us know by email, like, hey, there is a spelling in my name and I don't want you to keep my name in this horrible form, just please correct it. Then there should be definitely easy access and understandable for the person to request from you this correction.
Okay, so my next question is about storage limitation. Could you tell me a little bit about it?
This is actually my favorite one because GDPR says that data can be tapped no longer than is necessary. And usually people feel very insecure with the fact that it's no longer than necessary. Like, actually, what does it even mean? For me, this is this approach from the side of the European Commission to actually allow all of us to determine on our own what is necessary for us. Because there will be like thousands of examples. If you have an agreement with someone, so you keep the data of the person who is the other side of this agreement, then probably your national law regulates how long you should keep the data because of invoicing process or whatever other, the potential to give a complaint to you after the agreement is ended. So that would be definitely different. In case of emailing process, you may inform the person that I will keep your data for next 2 months because during this time we'll perform an agreement or I will sell you something, and then afterwards the legal ground expires, so you should not process data anymore. So it's definitely something what you can keep and what you can understand on your own. It depends what is your relation with the person who is the owner of data. Definitely, if you try to approach someone and the person simply states that, sorry, but I'm not okay with you processing my data and I want you to stop, unless there is any other legal ground or obligation from your national legal system, like, as I said, in case of agreement or invoicing, to keep the data for a particular time, you should be prepared to delete the data. So there's also this other side of storage limitation that you need to be able to address the request for data deletion from the owner of data.
So say I don't know how long I should keep hold of this data. Are there any guidelines for how long you should be holding on to data, or what if you just don't know?
Well, the best guideline in case of GDPR is always reasonable thinking, because right now there is nothing what just points that in case of this action you have this amount of time, in case of this action you have this amount of time. Just ask yourself, if I keep the data of this person a bit longer, does it actually make sense or is it justified? Have a look at the perspective of GDPR on the fact, can you process the data? And basically then just try to assess, like, is there something that connects me with the person so I can keep going, or basically there is nothing between me and this person and I'm just keeping the data unlawfully.
Okay, so now I have a question about confidentiality. Can you tell me, if I own a small or medium business, how should I interpret the confidentiality clause or principle?
It's just basically safety. So you should keep the data in the safest way you can. So as I said, open source solutions like Google Drive are accessible for all of your company, and you keep some more personal data there. So not just email addresses, but names, surnames, maybe dates of birth, anything like this. It's not a good solution. So confidentiality means just that you think who can access data. You are basically allowing the person, as for example, the owner of the company, that this department of my company can access this set of data, but it's not like all of the people in my company can access anything just because they can. So the time when you can write a permission that I allow my employee name and surname to access data of my users, and you don't mention the scope or the type or the reason, that's not that much legal anymore. So you should be more prepared to classify, to divide, and to actually limit the access of, for example, your employees to the data, and definitely keep them in a safe way. So if you have a locker in your company with the files of your employees, with data, definitely close it and keep it like one person, one key policy, not open source policy that I just can go and check what was the history of my colleague, which is just two desks next to me. So this is from the practical perspective how it works.
Okay, so I'll put things more into the practical perspective. Say I run a small or medium-sized company and I want to continue on doing marketing and generating leads. Should I be afraid of GDPR?
Well, I know that there is a big boom about this whole that no email marketing and in general no data processing, and it's all just gone and done and no more. It's not like this, because the aim of EU Commission was not to stop marketing at any point, because this is, I mean, this is something what runs business. So come on, like, seriously, any of you believe that it was made just to kill, and such a vast part of like business which allows growth and something which is very important, so small and medium enterprises? Definitely not. So what you should do is you should take those steps which you can. You should think it through, and you should not panic. So if you can obtain data in a legal way, so you can legally justify that, yes, I have a relation with this person, or I believe that there is a vital interest, and in the motives of GDPR, there is actually a justification, which is once read in conjunction of Article 6 of GDPR. It states that it's not like absolute exclusion of marketing. So definitely you should not be worried, and don't think that it's just cutting out all possibilities to run marketing, because it's simply not true.
Okay, so now what if I don't feel 100% sure that I understand GDPR? What am I supposed to do to learn about it more?
Well, the first good thing is that it definitely means that you are a sane and aware person, because if you would claim that you know 100% about GDPR, you will be simply not 100% honest with yourself, because no one knows. What you can and what you should do is try to minimize the spheres in which you feel insecure. So for example, if you really feel that storage of data in your company is a problem, then really think what you can do about it. So is there any ground by which you can justify the way you do it right now? Or if you honestly say, okay, I can't justify why the process looks like this, I mean, isn't it just an obvious denotation that you should actually change it?
So now, if I want to be legally compliant and GDPR compliant, should I get a legal audit at my company?
That's definitely a good idea. If it's doable for you, and you have any law office which you really trust or which is of a good reputation, that's a good shot, because then you will just get someone who is experienced, and like, that's definitely a safe idea. Also, if you can't afford it, just don't get too much stressed about it, because you simply should do some of the steps on your own. So try to make risk assessment, try to make data categorization, You may try also to make special documents for your employees that this person processed this kind of data because of this, so to be secure also in this sphere. So of course, audit, great thing. If you can afford it, just do it, because that makes you sleep well and in a way much more safer way, with the conscience that you did maximum of what you can. If you can't do it for whatever reason, try to do as much as you can on your own.
Okay, so now, is there a way to get GDPR compliant certification?
Well, right now there is no institution which gives you the stamp that you are GDPR compliant and you are fine. Especially that, as you can imagine, if there is no practice, so no cases, no court's decisions about GDPR, there is basically no institution which knows 100% the interpretation. So there is no something like GDPR fully compliant certificate which you can just get and then you're fine. Definitely, if you ever concerned ISO certification, that may be a good idea. But it's not necessary, because it's not said that something what is there would be here. So basically right now there's no way to get full certification which will be 100% error-proof, and that would be just working fine. And this is also a good thing, because GDPR's assumption is that this is something what medium and small enterprises, if can't afford, should be able to do on their own. So I mean, paying for super expensive certificate or ISO, which is not the cheapest one, that's difficult. And that's a financial effort. So you should be able to provide something on your own, and that should be actually enough. So this perspective from my side is way more reasonable.
Okay, so thank you very much for answering all my questions, Margaret. That's the end of my questions. So now we're going to be moving on to the Q&A section. So if you have any questions, please write them down, and we are moving on to the Q&As. We have a question. If companies have their email address displayed on the webpage, is that then not public info?
Well, the thing is that then we would need to imply the assumption that if the info is public, the owner agrees to any type of processing, just worldwide and any type, and it's as if we can give a consent to anything what can be done. Please remember that it's not that we can consent anymore to anything. So I would not risk with the assumption that it's fully allowed to use in any purpose. So the scope will be definitely narrowed to some extent, though we can try to match. So for example, if there's something what it's particularly associated with your business activity and addresses the needs on the other side, then definitely you may use the email address which is placed on the web page. Nevertheless, just assuming that because it's public, so it's accessible to anyone for whatever purpose, in my opinion, that does not sound like a right way of addressing this difficulty.
So I have a quick question before I move on to the next one. Would you say Dropbox is a safe place to store data on?
Well, actually, I'm not familiar with Dropbox security policy, but definitely this is something worth asking. So the best way and always the safest way with this type of question is something, okay, with GDPR, can I use it? Is actually to write to the support or marketing team in the company, depends which email address is like accessible, or to check terms of service and just check out if there is anything about GDPR compliance. If there is, that's a good shot to try, because then probably as a sub-processor, because you need to remember and understand that then probably you are administering data and they will be your processors. So you may just simply ask, is there anything what we as, or what you as processors provides to be GDPR compliant?
Okay, so one more question that connects to this. What happens about a current list? If I currently have a list, should I remind my members that they are on the list and ask them again for their permission to continue so that I can keep on sending emails?
That's a great question, and it's very frequently asked. The first thing is that if you asked about the consent beforehand, if you did, you can just check in what form it was asked. So did you just explain why you're using the data? If you explain to what extent and in what way they will be processed, it will be processed, and also to ask if you asked about the storage limitation, so you said that you will process this data and this is the way to withdraw your consent, and you can just do it by letting me know, please unsubscribe and delete my data. If anything like this is there, it seems to be GDPR compliant, so definitely then you're safe at that stage. But if there is anything missing, so for example, you forgot to inform about the storage limitation, or you forgot to say in what way you're processing data, to just be safe and ensure that all is fine, I would send email reminding, or just while you will send another correspondence to the person, include in a signature, for example, a GDPR compliance note. So, hey, I'm processing your data and this way because you subscribed here, and if you wish me to delete the data, please go here.
Okay, so I have another question. What if I have an email that says kittycat123@gmail.com? Is that a personal email?
Well, it depends if your name and surname is kittycat, because if we assume that yes, it's my name and surname, then it's just clearly using your name and surname with your personal data. But if it's just any like other expression, then it simply not denotes you as a person. So if it's name and surname, then yes. If it's just any phrase, then it's not.
Okay, my next question from Tom. He asks a question: can you advise where liability sits from obtaining opt-in consent if one company emails on behalf of another or using their email account?
Well, it's definitely depends on the agreement between you and the company. So the best option, the best thing to ask is to check if the person whose data are processed, if the person knows that there is any sub-processor, because the list of sub-processors should be accessible. Nevertheless, the question of liability is very legal. So it depends if you want to know about the breach. So what happens if the breach is on the side of sub-processor or an administrator? Definitely there is an obligation to report. So with any question concerning liability on any of sides, I would actually consult a lawyer. Nevertheless, the thing with any sub-processor is about informing the person.
Okay, I have another question here from Jan. He asks, if I harvested an email from the web and I'm sending a cold email, can you tell me about what steps I should take from there?
Well, actually the matter of cold emailing precisely would be the topic of my next webinar next week. So maybe we'll leave this question for the next session, where I will explain briefly on legal grounds, but just not to leave the question unanswered. The thing is, if you have legal grounds, so if this is your marketing purpose, if it's also in the vital interest of the other person, and if you inform how to withdraw the consent, actually consent not given, but how to withdraw data processing and what to do to ensure that all information obligation is performed properly.
All right, so thank you very much for your questions. As Margaret mentioned, we are going to be having another webinar about GDPR next Wednesday, March 21st, and we're going to be running this GDPR webinar more specifically about email outreach, where we're going to be talking about email marketing and cold email campaigns and how to make them GDPR compliant. Please join us again Wednesday next week. Thank you very much, Margaret, for your time, and hope to see you all next week.
Thank you very much as well.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much for attending.